Okay, hello and welcome to the ManageIQ Sprint34 review. Happy New Year. This sprint was 1 week extra because most of the people in the US were off for a week during between Christmas and New Year's. So let's dive into it. Next slide. As usual, I'll give the sprint statistics overview. Greg B will talk about the providers. Greg T will talk about the Appliance core. Alberto will give us an update on the REST API. Dan will tell us about the user interface changes, and Greg will tell us what's going on in Automate. Next slide, please. All right, so 4-week sprint, a little unusual for us. 241 pull requests merged. A good, third of that looks like it's bugs. About 20% is enhancements, and everything else kind of sprinkled around. So really a lot of work was done, again, in more stabilization, more refactoring, and more tests. Next slide, please. If we break it down by feature category, we see that a lot of work was done in the providers and in the UI, and in the providers, a lot of it was the containers, the vast majority. Next slide, please. Gymnasium is creeping up, so we're now 64. Gems are behind the latest release version. So we'll slowly be trying to resolve each one as we see them. We took away the other one on the other statistic on code coveralls, because it was really erratic and it was just jumping around between each sprint. So if and when we can get that restored to some normalcy, we'll reinstate it. Next slide, please. And as usual, the other repos, not just the ManageIQ repo, also got some attention. The bot was the number one repo, outside of ManageIQ, getting changes. The Appliance build got some because we upgraded to CentOS 7.2. The Azure work is continuing, and then a sprinkling all around in the other ones. Next slide, please. All right, turning it over to Greg B to tell us about providers.
All right, can you guys hear me?
Yep.
All right, great. So despite the recent holidays, I saw a number of people out on vacation this last sprint. We saw a large number of cool changes coming in to the provider space. I'll talk a little bit about the container management team, the Openstack team, and the ongoing work happening with Google Cloud Engine. So next slide. So in addition to seeing a ton of great fixes coming from the container management team, we also saw some cool visualizations. At the bottom of this screenshot, you can see the network trend graphs. And on the left, you can see these new donut charts. Donuts. I really like how the container management team keeps pushing forward with new ways to visualize data. I think that's really cool. So jump to the next slide. Openstack. There were a few notable features in addition to a bunch of bug fixes. The first feature is that we now show memory metrics. Ceilometer added memory meters a while back, and we're now capturing them and presenting the data. Next slide. We also cleaned up the way we're displaying images in Openstack. Before, the image page basically mirrored the instance summary page. And obviously that's insufficient and in some cases just incorrect. For instance, like data like power management and retirement didn't really make sense for images. And now we're also showing like the root device type and the parent VM if there is one for the image. So a little bit cleanup there. Next page or next slide. The last OpenStack feature to point out is new support for selecting the security protocol for the OpenStack API connection. Previously, we had this kind of complicated code to make decisions based on responses from the API to determine if the connection was an SSL connection or not. And now we just let the user tell us. This is way more maintainable and really more reliable than what we had before. So I think this will be really nice. Next slide. For Google Cloud Engine, we're now able to show off inventory that's been collected. Here we can see the provider summary page and a list of images. If you go to the next slide, we also have some power operations for Google. Adam said that he's putting some finishing touches on a couple more pieces, and next sprint, we should see a pretty cool demo of all this coming together. I'm pretty excited to see that. So that's it for the provider side. I'm going to kick it over to Greg T to talk about appliance updates.
Okay, you guys hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, so on the appliance core side, we got 32 PRs merged. Those are spread out across bugs, enhancement, technical debt, and some performance improvements as well. Couple things of note to talk about. So I think Oleg mentioned that in the beginning. We've upgraded the nightly build appliance to use CentOS 7.2. We were previously on 7.1. Next slide, please. So we've improved we've cleaned up the behavior of the log collection. There's always been a lot of confusion around that. So previously, the appliance depot that was defined was preferred, even if you were collecting logs on the zone. So now it's pretty simple. So if you ask to collect logs on the zone and you have a zone depot defined, it'll use that depot. If it's not defined, it'll be disabled and with a message. And same thing at the appliance level. If you collect logs there and is one defined, it'll use that. If it's not defined, you also get a message. It'll be disabled with a message. One other thing we did was we made a change to external authentication with IPA. So we've added support for top-level domains. There were a bunch of issues that came up around this. Top-level domain where there's no .NET and it was being rejected, not a standard configuration, but people use that in test environments, and we've also seen that in some production environments. So we fixed that up too. And that's really about it of note to talk about on the appliance core side. So I'll turn it over to Alberto, and he can talk about the REST API enhancements.
Okay, so for REST API, Tim has been busy cranking out a couple of enhancements. So the first one on top was a request from the self-service UI. We needed to provide the ability to ignore casing in sorts. So that was provided with the option, the sort options here, ignore case. We also added some actions to the VM's resources. So here, essentially, you can run these actions on individual VMs, or like the others, you can also target multiple VMs in a single request. So the first one here is the refresh action, similar to the classic UI, refreshing relationships and power states. Second one is the reset for the VMs. Next slide, please. Right. The guest shutdown, the action is shutdown guests. And lastly, the guest restart. So again, the action name is closer in line with the actual method in Ruby, so it's a reboot guest. Off to the next slide. Yep. So this one, Martin H. Provided this enhancement. There was a case in the self-service UI while a user is authenticated, the self-service UI itself makes requests to the REST API on behalf, but it really things like a heartbeat and stuff like that really shouldn't be extending a token's time to live. So he provided a new HTTP entry for the headers, which is a HTTP X auth skip token renewal. So things like heartbeats and system triggered requests on behalf of the user will not extend the user's session. So, and that's working well. And that's it for the rest. Off to the next slide, please.
Dan?
So, yep. So for the user interface, we had 74 PRs merged, a little bit lower, but we got a lot of people out, over the time period. Still leaning heavily on bugs, cleaning up, bugs that have been found in the previous release, as well as a lot of the refactoring that's going on is, causing some heartache, but working out okay. New functionality, we did squeeze some things in there. We're starting to take advantage of the fact that we're using pattern fly and bootstrap and realize that there's some cool switches and things. So I'll show you the start of that. We did get I18N in for the toolbars, which is another step towards 100% I18N coverage. We still have quite a few phases to go on that, but that got in there. And then, as Greg B said earlier, the container team has been busy, and they're staying busy. So I'll show you a couple of their updates as well. Next. So the new bootstrap switches, this is just the first one. We had to get it in there and try it out and see how to implement it. You can see the before and after. So this is in managing quotas for tenants. You can see there on the left, actual pretty cool looking switches. So they have various different kinds, yes and no's, on and off, things like that. So we found some other locations in the UI that we're going to upgrade as well, just like this. Next.
Those on-off switches on the left, Dan?
Yep.
Cool.
Replacing the checkboxes. Yep. So just kind of cool stuff. Okay, next. I18N for toolbars. You can see there those Japanese toolbars just above the quad icons. We did not have coverage for those before, and a lot of that stuff is stored in YAML, so we had to put some hooks in to catch all that, as well as find all these strings that need to be translated. So all the toolbars should now be translated, and we're working on other things that are still missing. Next slide. All right, Greg B mentioned this before, but it's worth repeating because this is pretty cool stuff. Obviously, the donuts, the heat maps on the right there, and the network trends. Some of the projects that are going on in the future is taking some of these widgets and getting the same kind of functionality that exists in the current CloudForm widgets, such as generating the content and things like that, as well as some of the UI upgrades. So we're going to eventually try to mix these together, so you'll be able to put all kinds of widgets on any dashboard you want and customize them as well. Right now, these are kind of static. So next. And the topology is continuing to be enhanced. I know the containers team, I don't want to steal any of their thunder. I know they're working on some more enhancements as well. One of the keys here, though, was a really good enhancement to show colors for the status. So similar to our quad icons now, you can kind of see things that are red there, and if you look at it, you can hover over them and see that there's show you what's wrong with it and things like that. So that's pretty cool. They're going to continue, like I said, making topology even better. So that is it on the UI side. So next is, I think, Greg.
Yep. Thanks, Dan. So for Automate, a couple of enhancements we got in this sprint. So Azure now supports, or Azure, I'm still not sure, VM retirement through through Automate, which follows the same workflow as the other cloud providers, but we always add kind of hooks that allow you to customize within each provider. So got that modeling done. For Openstack, there was a few switchboard event updates. We identified a few that had policy events that were not wired up, so a few new ones in there, and then based on that work, a couple of other events also got updated to properly map the policy event that should be triggered with those events. And then for the service modeling, this is a simple one, but just added the networks into the hardware, which is a model related to both hosts and VMs. So we had at least one use case where somebody had to get to the networks, and there is a way to get to it through guest devices, but it's kind of ugly and was not exactly, was harder to get the exact results that they wanted. So the network relationship is available in our modeling, and so we just expose that through the hardware layer here. Next slide. And then around services, we had the, so we added instance and methods generation email for the consolidated quota. We do this for VMs. The logic was there, but we just needed to wire in a few items. So got that done for the 3 pending denied, and warnings. And then for the service dialogues, we enhanced the validation. We had validation before where we checked to just make sure that a dialogue had at least a single field, but you could still create dialogues that had kind of an invalid configuration and could blow up in the UI. So now we're validating that through each branch. Tabs have group boxes and boxes have elements. And so at design time, we're actually now checking that and ensuring that they're built properly. So get that in as well. I think that is it. Next slide.
Okay. Also wanted to mention that we are in the process of making a new release of Kappa Blanca. We've had a lot of feedback from the community that that there's issues with it, and we're trying to address all the issues that the community raised and make a new release of Kappa Blanca. So look for an announcement from Matthew Draper. He'll probably be leading the charge on that. Hopefully in the next few days we'll see that. And I guess that's it for this sprint review. Any questions or comments? Very quiet. Okay. So if not, I'd like to thank everybody for their contributions, and look forward to the next sprint. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.